Right now in Montana, about 5% of adults are either blind or have low vision. This is the first podcast in a 3-part series with our guest, Jacob Krissovich. Jacob was born with sight. In his early teenage years, he began to struggle with his vision. And by the time he was in his 30s, he was completely blind. We'll dive into his experience and amazing story, daily life and those awkward questions, as well as life with a guide dog in these next 3 episodes. I'm your host, Jennifer Van Sickle, longtime healthcare worker turned health educator. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking Health in the 406, where we're one community under the big sky. Jacob, when we visited with you before, you kind of told me that you started, so you have no sight now.
Yes.
But it kind of started when you were around 12? Or remind me the age. Tell me the story.
12 was a milestone, so to speak, so I could see how that would stick out. Started when I was 10.
10, okay. Mm-hmm.
But I went blind in my right eye completely by 12.
By 12,
so that's
okay.
where the 12 came into play. So at 10, I was playing hockey and I got hit really hard and slammed my head off the ice and was like really... I'm sure I got a concussion, but they just weren't as good about them back then. And I got up and I was really out of it and woozy and everything. And I was fine. Then, after that went away, I was fine. I just, did what 10-year-old boys do. Mm-hmm. Went on playing. And then slowly over the preceding weeks, I noticed a black dot in my vision. And again, like a 10-year-old boy, I ignored it. And it got progressively bigger and bigger and bigger until I couldn't really see much. It was, and it really scared me. So I finally said something to my parents because I just thought it would go away, and it didn't.
And was it like right in the center of your vision? So you're trying to read at school, or was it?
It was like a little off center, but then as it got bigger, it was taking up. If I recollect correctly, it took up like the top half of my vision, and. By the time we got in to the doctor, because, Helena was still smaller.
Right.
A lot smaller back then. And so we just went and saw the pediatrician because we weren't sure what to do. And luckily she was knowledgeable enough to know that it was, retina related. And so she sent us she immediately called an eye doctor here in town who referred us over to Billings immediately. And went to Billings, and because at that point I could just see silhouettes of people if they were standing in front of a light. It went fast.
Wow.
And it was terrifying at 10. And so they took us to Billings, my parents took me to Billings, and the retinal specialist at that point told me that if they didn't do surgery the next day that I'd be blind in my right eye. And I appreciate the honesty, but I was also 10, so, maybe could have told my parents and they could have, relayed the information in a kid-friendly way. So obviously I was terrified, and I never had surgery before, and just all those things. And anyways, they did the surgery. Because I waited so long, it ended up being, if I remember correctly, I think it was a 4-hour surgery, which is a really long time to be under. And anyways, they ended up being successful. And my vision stabilized out. I went back to seeing well again after around 6 weeks. And then it happened again a few months later.
Just on its own. No more bumping trauma. And was your other eye fine?
Yeah, my other eye.
This whole time?
Yeah, my other eye was fine this whole time. And then it happened several more times. They kept doing the surgeries. And by 12, I went blind in my right eye.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And about the same time as that, I'm a little hazy on the timeline, but it was either slightly before it or slightly after. I believe it was slightly after. It happened in my left eye.
And just on its own.
Just on its own on that
No
one.
more hockey injuries.
Yeah, and that's why at that point, originally they thought maybe it was tied to head trauma, because in younger individuals, retinas don't tear, they don't detach. That's usually in the 50 plus that happens. Mm-hmm. And so when it happens in younger individuals, it's usually sports like hockey and football. It's a head trauma. And they kind of ruled that out because of the fact that there had been no recent trauma. That it had at that point had been like 2 or 3 years. since the trauma, so it made no sense that it would happen in my left eye. So I, between the ages of 10 and 17, ended up having 14 eye surgeries.
Wow. And was Montana able to handle that, or did you have to go out of state?
I did ultimately have to go out of state, so that retinal specialist who did my first surgery only did that one, and then left to another state. So then I ended up going to Great Falls. They did my surgeries right up until right before I went blind in my right eye. And at that point, the doctor in Great Falls he said, this is beyond my level of expertise. I can't get this to stop. I'm going to send you down to Salt Lake City. There's a center there called the John Moran Eye Center, which is like world renowned. It's that facility and John Hopkins are the top two eye surgery centers in the world. I went to that one and I went and saw that specialist, and he at that point said, I'm going to do my best, but there's a lot of scar tissue buildup, a lot of trauma that's happened with your right eye. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to save the vision in that eye. But then after several surgeries with the left one, he finally decided to do something that was experimental that they hadn't never done before with the patient. And so they did that. And thanks to him trying that out, I stabilized out at 17 until about 5 years ago.
Wow.
So, yeah, he bought me some time, which was really nice.
Yeah. And so there you are going through middle school, high school, the tough years anyway. And
yep.
No more sports. Did it affect your life any other way in middle school and high school besides having to miss school? Yeah.
Yeah, tremendously. Especially in middle school, kids can be mean.
Yes.
And I mean, just your run-of-the-mill, I hate using the word normal, but your run-of-the-mill, child without any, noticeable things that make them stick out gets bullied and teased. And when you miss 6 weeks of school repeatedly over and over again, you really stick out. And when I would come back to school, my eye would be, really red, and, I'd have to do eye drops throughout the day and stuff. And so I really stuck out. And with that came, unfortunately, a very severe degree of bullying, not just verbal, name calling and stuff like that, but also physical bullying in terms of I had kids try to give me swirlies. I was also small for my age.
Mm-hmm.
I was the shortest boy in the class. I was shorter than a lot of the girls. And so, the swirlies trying to get shoved into lockers, which isn't really a thing. People don't fit into lockers.
Right.
But I guess the apex of it is, and this is why I really think bullying is an issue that really does need to be addressed, is at one point, thank goodness one kid spoke up, but they were actually going to put me in a freezer, like a chest freezer.
Oh, wow.
And one kid was going to sit on top of it. And, it was quite severe. And so that was hard on top of already going through all these surgeries and the trauma that goes with that.
Oh, that's unreal. That's almost beyond bullying. Yeah, yeah.
It was very systematic to the point where I did not want to go to school. I was, no kid wants to go to school.
Right.
But especially in middle school. But at that point, it was fear driven. Teachers were worried about me because when I walked down the hallways, I would always be staring at the ground, because I kind of figured if I didn't make eye contact, maybe they wouldn't notice me. And they were smart. They would do it in areas where teachers weren't. And to be fair to the teachers, they're understaffed and they can't watch every inch of the school. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
Or appropriate for bathrooms and things,
Yeah.
So.
Was that middle school and high school to that, or did it get a little better worse in high school?
Middle school was the apex of it.
Okay.
Yep. But then it did continue into freshman year. Less of the physical, but more verbal at that point. And then sophomore year, thank goodness, I hit a growth spurt and I grew literally a foot in a year. All I did was basically eat and sleep. And so I ended up coming out to be 6 foot. And so that made it easier. Plus, I made some really good friends going from East Valley Middle School to Helena High. You get a different group of kids, and so I made some really good friends, and those kids they were quite big, and that wasn't on purpose. They just ended up being that way, and so they kind of looked out for me, and
good.
I remember one time these two kids were talking about when I was walking over to where my mom was going to pick me up. These two kids were talking about, beating me up, and my friend happened to come up behind them and hurt them and intervened, and they basically tuck tail and run because he was a big boy. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Advocate and tell our kids,
That's
I think that's the thing.
Well,
Teach your kids to not do that and to stand up for others, definitely.
And that was the thing that I was grateful for. It was, it wasn't like my friends were aggressive or anything. They just, all it took was them advocating and standing up, just saying something like, leave them alone, and back down.
Yeah. It's
They're
amazing.
Just used to people not saying anything.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of the voice is bigger than people realize. Definitely.
Also, learned a sense of humor is a really good way to disarm situations.
Yes. In many aspects of life. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So you finished high school and you have, by that point in time, you were completely blind in one eye.
Yes.
And so then you knew you were on borrowed time with the other. Were you aware that, okay, let's just go for life? Or were you hoping at that point in time that they can, this will just hang in there? We've got it? Or?
I took the approach of, I don't know when this is going to end, and I'm going to live my life. I'm not going to be dumb and run head first into walls and things like that. But I'm still going to go do things. Like, I'm still going to go skiing. I'm going to go wakeboarding and, just these things. I'm just going to be careful, as careful as you can be, because I just realized that at some point this could happen anyways. And especially when it was more up to me. My parents wanted me to experience life, but they also wanted to keep me safe like parents want to, and so I was on my own. I really did. I went and did those things. Fortunately, I was still able to drive with what they call a conditional permit, where you're, not supposed to drive at night and things like that. Okay. So I was still able to drive because I had good vision in my left eye. But yeah, so I went and I lived my life. I went backpacking. I went, camping and fishing and all those things. I still...
And while you were doing all that, were you maybe learning Braille or anything like that at that point in time for the just in case?
I wish.
Yeah.
18-year-old boys they're still not very smart in the grand scheme of things. Sorry to any 18-year-old boys that may be listening. You are a boy. You are a boy for a long time, much longer than girls. And so, no, I wish I would have been. And I had people ask me that, and I ended up going to college right after school. I was fortunate in that I scored well in the ACTs. I learned to adapt in terms of education. When I fall missing all that school, I had to either give up or push through. And I ended up having to self-teach, had to teach myself a lot of things. And the teachers were great in helping me with that, but I ended up scoring well in ACT, so I got good scholarships and I went to Carroll. And at that point, I got set up with Blind and Low Vision Services, which is a program through Voc Rehab. And their whole purpose, it's actually part of DPHHS, their whole purpose is to help people with getting post-secondary education, whether it's your typical college or some sort of trade. And that's Voc Rehab in general, but Blind and Low Vision Services is focused obviously on blind individuals and people with low vision and a face.
And so how many years total then did you get to go? Did you go with just that one eye until you lost your vision 4 years ago? Are we talking like 10 years or 15?
From when I first lost my vision in the right eye?
Yes.
It would have been, you're asking me to do math.
I am. Don't ask me to do it because we'll get the wrong answer.
It would have been approximately 16 years.
16. That's a lot of living in there. Definitely.
Yeah, it is. And I got to do a lot of great things. Through a program in high school that was college prep called Upward Bound.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if it's still in existence. I hope so. It's a great program. It's a program that helps kids who are either low income or their parents that they don't have like a bachelor's degree. They'll work if you have an associate's, if one of your parents does. But their whole idea is to get kids to go to college. And so through that program, I got to go to Washington, D.C. and New York City, which was really cool. And also, when I was in college, I got to go to Botswana, Africa for 2.5 months. So I got to do a lot in those 16 years. I made a point of it.
Nice. Nice. And you're married, so you must have met somebody, had the big, beautiful wedding and everything.
I did, yes. I met my wife when I was in college, and we met at a place here in town that used to be in existence. Unfortunately, it went under, called Boys and Girls Club. It was an after-school program for low-income children. And so we met there, and then we were friends at first, and we ended up starting to date, and then we ended up getting married, and 2 young boys named Asher and Declan. They are 8 and 6, almost 9 and 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have kind of an interesting case in that. So you had life where you saw what you saw your sons be born.
Yeah.
You saw their faces.
Yes.
You know what your wife looks like.
Yes.
And then when you started to lose vision in that second eye, did it just happen like boom overnight, or was it like, oh man, there's that black spot again and it's getting bigger? What was it like losing that second?
So it was interesting in that it manifested itself differently because of their experimental surgery he did at 17 that stopped it. What he ended up doing was putting a silicone gel in the eye, inside of your eye. I guess I should back up here. Some people might not know what a retina is. It's basically the lining at the back of your eye, and the image projects onto it, and then your brain takes that through the nerve and makes sense of it. And that lining tore, and inside of your eye there's a fluid called a vitreous fluid, and what he did was, the vitreous fluid's kind of thinner, it's less viscous, and what he did was he put in a really thick viscous silicone gel in there. And the whole idea was, if it's thicker, it'll apply more pressure on the retina and stop it from lifting. And so with that, the signs were different. Normally you see flashing lights, or you'll see floating dots, or you'll see a curtain. What happened with this was my vision started to get blurry in the middle of my vision, and I was really confused. I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't want to go through this again. It was really hard from a mental health standpoint. And so I went and saw my doctor. They're like, well, you have macular edema. We're not really sure what's causing it. And then slowly got worse. And what they ended up finally realizing was that the retina was separating, but it was just doing it so slowly because the oil, that it was hard to notice at first. And so they did a bunch of things at first, like steroid injections and stuff, not realizing it was the retina that was detaching again. And so it kind of was gradually decreasing, and it was getting just essentially blurrier and blurrier, and instead of getting dark. And then they realized that it was the retina detaching again, and they went in to do surgery. And at that point I was legally blind, but which is, for people who don't know, is your vision's 2200 or worse, and when you're considered legally blind, which means that something that a person with ordinary good sight would see, like you guys would see something, assuming that you guys have good vision, you guys would see something at 20 feet and be able to read it. Or I mean, sorry, flip that. What you guys would be able to see at 200 feet away, I would have to be 20 feet away to read.
Wow.
It's basically the way that works out. And so at that point I was legally blind. They did the surgery, and the doctor said, we'll see how this takes, but your eye didn't respond super great to it. And sure enough, as the weeks went on, my vision just didn't return. It was just, and then he said, I'm sorry, there's not anything else I can do. And so anyways, from there, it just gradually, slowly got darker and darker. And he didn't know where it was going to stop. I didn't know where it was going to stop. And it ended up stopping with me being totally blind, with not being able to see any light or anything. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And that was, it sounds like over months, just a matter of months. So.
Yeah.
how did you cope? Were you still able to, with work or life in general, were you just adapting as fast as you could? Or did you need like to take a couple months off and try and mentally just regroup?
I
Or what were you doing with your mental health and life at that point?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. At first I was so busy with adapting and trying to keep my head above water with work and being a dad because, and a husband, like your life doesn't stop for you to adapt and learn. Um, you either keep up and do your best or you wallow.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We're going to end the podcast here, but don't worry, we're coming back with a second podcast with Jacob, and we pick up right where we left off. In this episode, you heard Jacob mention blind and low vision services. This is a bureau at the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. Another great bureau is the Vocational Rehabilitation and Blind Services Bureau. For more information on these and other programs available, visit talkinghealthinthe406.mt.gov. And we'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.